So, on the last leg of my month-long Japan solo trip, I spent a week in Hokkaido, saw the sights of Lake Toya, Sapporo, and got some bad weather in Hakodate before a peaceful evening. Now, on my way back to Tokyo via the Shinkansen, I had my biggest challenge yet to come, one that would affect me for the remaining 3 or so weeks I still had in Japan: the flu. To be fair, sickness and colds are something that are to be expected when traveling, especially considering what I was doing, spending a month doing non-stop travel overseas, changing seasons from summer to winter so suddenly, not being used to cold weather or having the clothes for it, staying in hostels where germs spread easily, not getting enough rest or having the time or resources to cook a proper meal, riding crowded public transport. It was practically inevitable for me to get sick. So here's a story of my 2 or so weeks in the Kansai region of Japan, where I got sick and tried to survive whilst making the best of it. Catching the Shinkansen from Hakodate, I was riding it directly to Tokyo Station. My destination was Machida, a separate city within Tokyo Prefecture. A bit confusing, I know. I was going to stay there for 2 days for a bit of a small break between the two legs of my journey, and specifically in Machida because I wanted to see the Snoopy Museum. I ended up catching the train to Yokohama, and then catching the Yokohama line to Machida, which was a bit out of the way, but I still wasn't really familiar with the Tokyo rail network, so that's the way I did it. I was staying at a hostel that was behind a little restaurant/cafe. It was really cool and reminded me of Persona 5. For reference, when I looked up Machida prior to going, this was all I saw. Yeah, not the best, but upon arrival, I was really blown away. It's like a little Shibuya, really lively, bustling, and has a lot to offer. I spent that evening after traveling all day, exploring central Machida and looking in the really big book-off store there, and buying gifts for friends. It was a real fun time. The next day, I walked to the Snoopy Museum, which is actually kind of far from central Machida, but I was happy to walk around and explore the streets, despite feeling a bit of a cold coming on. And this long walk might have made Machida my favorite place in Japan. It felt super livable, the streets were all really nice and a mix of urban city and rural Japan that I'd never seen prior before. Houses were a bit bigger, some people even had yards, and there were a few plots of farmland here and there. It had a healthy mix of greenery and urban sprawl, which I feel can be hard to find, especially this close to Tokyo. All the while having its bustling shopping area with restaurants and shops. Geographically as well, Machida is just a short trip away from the mountains, the ocean, and central Tokyo, all by train. If I was to live anywhere in Japan, Machida would definitely be at the top of that list. The Snoopy Museum itself was really great. It's in Ghibli Park, which has plenty of space for people, families, and their pets, and it's an open-air shopping mall with lots of outdoor specialized shops, and even a rock climbing wall. The museum focused a lot on the development of the Peanuts comic over the decades and Charles Schulz himself. It was all really high quality and I got to see some original comics done by Schulz. I'd really recommend it if you're a fan of Snoopy, Peanuts, or just comics in general, since it's such an influential work. Afterwards, I was wondering what else there was to do in Machida, and then I found out it's actually the hometown of Satoshi Tajiri, the creator of Pokemon. So Machida was the area he spent his childhood and was the inspiration for Pokemon. Realizing that, I can totally see how that was the case. I guess I'm just such a big Pokemon fan that I instinctively sought out Pokemon's homeland. I went to Setagaya Park, which is a nice park surrounded by hills with lots of levels of walking trails, but within that park was some Pokelids. In Japan, there are various manhole covers around the country that feature fun designs of Pokemon. I had completely forgotten about that until this moment, and in Machida the Pokelids feature all the Kanto starters and early root Pokemon since it's where the entire franchise began. A nice little touch. All in all, I walked about 30,000 steps that day, all over the city, but it was easily one of my favorites, and really stuck with me. Next, I was going to Hakone, in Kanagawa Prefecture. I would just be spending a day in the mountain town. I had been recommended Hakone in the past, and my main goal was to get a good view of Mount Fuji. Conveniently, there is the Otakyu line, which runs direct from Machida to Hakone, so I caught that and was on my way. Upon arrival, I chucked my suitcase in a storage locker and got to exploring a bit of the town. Honestly, not to trash on Hakone or anything, but I was pretty disappointed. Hakone really is beautiful, surrounded by mountains with traditional buildings and ryokan everywhere, but the main problem was just how busy it was. The streets are really narrow and it was suffocating of how full it was of people. I ended up just trying to get away from it all and tried to relax a bit along the river. Ironically, Hakone is a spot people visit for relaxing getaways with onsen and fancy ryokan, neither of which I'd be experiencing in my hostel, and I felt my cold getting worse compared to the earlier day. But I was determined to get my view of Mount Fuji, so I ventured back into the crowd and caught the Tozan Mountain Railway further up. It's a pretty cool and unique train. It goes up switchbacks and they conduct us to get out and go to the other end of the train at each switchback. It was, however, kind of expensive. Arriving further up, I wanted to catch the ropeway to get to my view of Mount Fuji, but to get there, you have to take another cable car. Anticipating that the ropeway might be expensive, it was, I opted to walk up the mountain instead. Not the best choice when I was getting sick, so that's how I ended up hiking Mount Hakone through the clouds up these very steep streets to the ropeway. Finally though, I was on the ropeway and I was heading up the mountain, and at last I saw a view of Mount Fuji. It was incredibly windy, and it can be rare to get an unobstructed view of Mount Fuji with all the clouds, but I got it. It was really rewarding after all the effort I went through to see it. Seeing these clouds drift by so quickly, and it's standing above everything around it, the tallest mountain in Japan. The ropeway stopped at Owakudani, which is home to a large lookout of the volcanic valley, full of sulfur and vents. It was really unique and something I'd never been exposed to before. After all, Australia has no volcanoes. I was disappointed, however, to find that the view of Fuji was obstructed by the building with the ropeway. Speaking of which, it was getting close to closing time, so I jumped back on, rode to the end, got out, saw Lake Ashi, and then immediately got back on so I could hike back down the mountain before it got dark. When I checked into the hostel that night, I wasn't feeling too great. After 2 very big days without properly treating my cold, I could tell it was going to get worse, and I still had another big day ahead of me. All in all, I probably made the wrong choice of going to Hakone specifically for views of Mount Fuji. That's not really what it's for. I'd probably have better luck if I went to the Fuji 5 Lakes area like Kawaguchiko in Yamanashi Prefecture, which is what I would do on a future trip. But to me, Hakone kind of felt a bit like a tourist trap. It was just super busy, just shops selling not the best kind of quality stuff, and expensive. It'd be nice to go with a partner, or if you had a car to rent and see other sites cheaper, but it was probably my least favourite spot on the whole trip, unfortunately. The next day, I wasn't feeling too good, and I had a big day. Today, I would be going to Nagoya to visit the Ghibli Park, and then heading to Kyoto in the evening. I had my tickets pre-booked and everything. I got up early and went to Odawara to catch the bullet train. Once I arrived at Nagoya, I tried to find a baggage locker since the Ghibli Park is on the opposite side of the city, but no luck unfortunately. So I ended up having to lug my suitcase across the city and the 2 different trains I'd be taking. These trains were pretty crowded, mind you. When I finally got to the park though, they had luggage storage there that I was able to use, which was excellent and perfect timing. The Ghibli Park was one of the things I was most looking forward to on this trip. However, it can be a bit tricky to book into. You see, you have to do so online, and you have to do it 3 months in advance. And the way it works is, unlike something like Disneyland, you have to book each area individually. So I was only able to get tickets for the Grand Warehouse and Mononoke Village, which comes as a package deal. The other parts I missed out on were the Hill of Youth and the Totoro Forest. The Grand Warehouse itself was really cool. It's such a spectacle of design and creativity inside, with the buildings, the tiny little details to the films. They had like the Philosophy Club from Up on Poppy Hill. They had little details like Yubaba's office from Spirited Away, a whole little Arietti area, the robot from Laputa, a bigger cat bus room with a museum that kids and adults can enjoy. Amazing exhibits about the food of the movies, how they designed it, and models based on the foods. Posters and just every single localization of the movies have been released all in one room. Lots of little models and everything. It was really great. However, I was pretty tired. I had been exhausted from all the traveling I was doing, and my sickness was only getting worse. In addition, the Ghibli Park was super busy. In my opinion, I don't think it's really the best thing to do on a solo trip. I think it'd be best enjoyed with friends. The main appeal for a lot of it is the photo opportunities. There is a big room or exhibit you can go into and take photos of sculptures of all the characters from movies and everything and be in the scenes of the movies. I didn't end up doing this because the queue was very long, I was very, very tired, and I had no one to take photos of or people to take pictures of me, so I just avoided it. I also didn't see the short film that was showing there, which was May and the Kitten Bus, because I was feeling sick, it'd be a few hours to wait, and I'd already seen it before, so I was happy to pass on that one. But if you are a really big Ghibli fan, like I am, there are still a lot there to appreciate, and I think you would still enjoy it. Granted, I would have enjoyed it a lot more if I wasn't sick. But in the end, I left after only a few hours because I was feeling not great and I had a lot of travel still to do that day. So I was at Nagoya Station waiting for my train in the evening with my pre-booked ticket, so I was there for a few hours all in all after getting dinner and everything. When on the platform, I didn't see my train number though, so I asked the attendant, and he said this train's booked for the morning of that day. It had already gone. Oh, so ka. I didn't realize in my kind of sickness delirium that I booked the wrong train for the wrong time because it used 24-hour time, and that was just a big blunder on my end. But it was okay. I was able to get into a GU Seki carriage, which is a free seating, no pre-booked required with my Japan Rail Pass, and I was still on my way to Kyoto. Granted, I did waste a few hours just at the train station waiting. Arriving in Kyoto, I wasn't in the best condition, not by a long shot. I had done so much in such a short amount of time without properly taking care of myself, and it finally caught up with me. I knew that I needed to rest and I had to sacrifice some of my trip to do so. I was going to be in Kyoto for 4 days, and I had already been there in the past, so I spent the next 3 days in bed. I rested, tried to keep away from other people as best I could to not spread germs, and only went out to get food, and when I did, I was really lightheaded and dizzy. For my last day in Kyoto, I had finally mustered enough energy to get out of bed at least, and I needed to get sunlight and exercise, otherwise I would just rot. I walked to the palace, I saw some shops, and visited the International Manga Museum, which was a nice quiet little day, and went back to the hostel before I ever did it. I didn't get to see much of Kyoto outside of that. You kind of have to travel from one side to be able to see a lot of the famous things like the 10,000 Gates, the Arashiyama Bamboo Forest, or the Kinkakuji Shrine, all of which I didn't really have the energy for, unfortunately. Next, I'd be spending 2 days in Nara. Only being a short 40 or so minute train ride away, it was pretty close. That's one of the good things about the Kansai region of Japan. Everything is only about an hour away from each other. Nara is of course famous for the Deer Park, which is what I'd be checking out, and it was also the capital of Japan before Kyoto, so there's a lot of historical and old sites there. The first day I was still pretty sick, so I didn't get to do much aside from sit in the park surrounded by deer, trying to catch my breath after walking up the hill with my suitcase, and wait until I could check into my hotel. It was really windy, so I ended up moving to a little indoor 7-Eleven food court area to eat some pork sandwiches and ice cream, whilst sheltered from the wind and cold. Probably not helping that I was eating ice cream while sick, but hey, I love ice cream and I love eating it during winter. Yeah. I then later bought some Japanese cold medicine called Paburon or Paburon. I'm not sure if it was the best medicine for what I had, but it seemed to help a little bit. It's kind of just like your standard over-the-counter paracetamol, really. Cold, cough medicine. And I ate some curry for dinner. On this day, I was staying at a bakery, and in the morning they provided a delicious toast breakfast, freshly baked that day. It was included with the cost of the bed, and it was really, really nice. For some reason, I decided to book 2 different places to stay in Nara. One was the bakery, and the other was a traditional guest house. I guess I wanted the 2 different experiences, but I didn't account for the check-in times, which are often 4 PM. So after throwing my stuff in a coin locker again, seriously, these things are lifesavers when you can find them, I spent the day properly exploring Nara Park with some more energy. In the past, I'd been to Nara, but only stayed in the first little entrance area hanging out the deer, and didn't realize that there was a ton of history and culture, plus a much bigger park to see. So this time, I actually saw Nara Park. It was nice to see all the temples and spend time soaking in the warm sun, something I really needed after being sick for so long. The guest house itself was really cool. Literally, it was quite cold. You see, all the different parts of the house were connected by these open-air walkways, same with the bathroom and toilets, so it was chilly going from one spot to the other. I ended up mainly hanging out in the common area where it was warmest. The whole guest house was really traditional, and felt like I was bustling with the comings and goings of different people from all different walks of life, like a trading post or something from an older era. The only thing that really broke the illusion though was that the reception entrance had a gaming chair. Heading into Osaka next, the second biggest metro area in Japan, I've only really been to Osaka once in the past, and I ended up mainly just redoing the same things I did on that past trip here. Actually because I was still sick and didn't want too big of days, and because unlike Tokyo, I'm very unfamiliar with Osaka, so I didn't actually know a lot to do there. I was only there for 3-ish days, so I went to Dotonbori near my hostel, spent a day at the Kaiyukan Aquarium, and then mainly hung around the central Osaka station area. Osaka is best known for its food and nightlife, both of which aren't really my main interests when traveling, plus I was sick, so I mainly wanted to keep to myself. There was a cool mall with a big red whale though, called Hep 5. However, because Osaka is such a big hub, my hostel was actually pretty busy. It was here I happened to meet 3 other Australians in my dorm room who had been travelling the country too. It was strange because they were the first Australians I'd seen in about 3 weeks, but most of the other people I'd met had talked about how they just kept running into Australians. So I'm actually quite glad I was lucky enough to avoid my own culture and have unique experiences for the majority of my trip. All in all, I didn't get to spend too long in Osaka, and given better conditions for myself, I'd like to see more of it in the future. I think it's a good home base for doing a lot in the Kansai area, so if you have any suggestions on possible things to do there in the future, then please let me know in the comments. The last stop on my Kansai tour now was Lake Biwa and Otsu in Shiga Prefecture. Lake Biwa is the largest lake in Japan, and I was always curious to visit. I'd be spending 2 nights there before heading back to Tokyo on the last day of my rail pass. It was only about a 15-minute train ride away from Osaka, and only about 20 minutes from Kyoto. I'd highly recommend you pay a visit to it if you ever have a day to spare in the area. It ended up being one of my favourite spots. I was staying further up the coast of the lake, where it was pretty rural and mainly farmland. Honestly, I was really happy to be back in the Japanese countryside after spending the last 2 weeks or so jumping from big city to big city. The first night there was nothing really open near me aside from a Hawaiian restaurant, and I wouldn't be surprised if I was one of their only customers that day. There was nobody around. Like Lake Toya, Lake Biwa is much more of a summer destination, so it was very quiet this time of year. But seeing a body of water so big that wasn't the ocean was quite the culture shock for me. Seeing islands off in the distance that were faded from the atmospheric perspective, but knowing it was all inland was so bizarre, and seeing the clear water as opposed to murky ocean water was like nothing I had ever seen before. The next day was one I was really looking forward to. You see, Lake Biwa has a cycling path that goes around its entire circumference, and I was finally feeling well enough, so I rented a bicycle and cycled all the way to Otsu City and back, all in all about 34 kilometers. This was one of my favorite days for sure. Cycling through the countryside and farmland with a beautiful lake on one side and steep mountains on the other was magical, and all throughout were autumn colors. The sun was shining, the temperature was perfect. I had so much fun feeling properly immersed in the countryside and getting a taste of real Japan. While riding through some farmland, I even saw a wild stoat across the path, cycled along the many hawks that surveyed the area. Cycling next to the lake, there were so many birds and herons, it felt like I was one with nature or in a Ghibli movie. I even got greeted by farmers and older people that went past. It was so great, and something I'd really recommend you to do if you ever have the chance to cycle in Japan. And I was the only foreigner I saw the whole time there. It felt like something that was wholly unique to me and my trip, and I'm so glad I did it. That was until I saw Chris Broad had already done it, unbeknownst to me in a prior video of his. So, whilst I spent a lot of this time feeling sick, and boy was I feeling sick, like dizzy, fatigued, and snotty, not getting proper sleep, my time in Kansai was a really formative one for me and built up my resilience for the future. I feel like if I was able to survive in such a state and still get some enjoyment, then I could do anything in the future. I'd like to give Kansai another visit in the future, hopefully while not sick, and properly get to know it. Regardless though, I saw some amazing things this time, learned a lot, and I don't regret any of it. All that lay before me now on my trip was my final full week in Tokyo, but I'll save that for the final part of this series. Hello again, thank you for watching. I should still have one more Japan video out after this one, of my week in Tokyo, but it will probably be a bit of a shorter one. And apologies for there not being as many videos or as consistent lately. May has been a very busy month for me with travel, family visiting, birthdays, just a lot going on. May is always like one of the busiest months of the year for me. But next month in June, things will be getting back on schedule with lots of videos planned. I am excited, so look forward to it. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye!